Imagine living a life that feels perfect, until one night, a single discovery shatters everything. A husband, a wife, and a love triangle with a deadly twist. Jealousy, rage, and a fatal mistake. What would you do if your entire world was torn apart in a single, violent moment? Welcome to Crime of Passion. Tonight, we unravel a chilling tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Settle in, dim the lights, and let the weight of this story sink in. You might think you know where this is going, but trust me, by the time it's over, you'll be questioning everything. Get ready to dive into a tragedy fueled by fear, suspicion, and a murder that could have been avoided, but wasn't. Eric McLean had always believed his life was solid, like a brick wall, unmovable, secure. He had a beautiful wife, Erin, and 2 children who adored him. Their home was warm, a safe haven filled with laughter, the smell of dinner cooking, the kind of place you'd walk into and immediately feel a sense of peace. The kind of life that seemed perfect from the outside. But there are cracks in every wall, no matter how solid it seems. It started with a feeling, something small, almost imperceptible, like a shift in the air. The creeping suspicion that something was off, something was wrong with Erin's relationship with Sean Powell. Sean had once been one of Erin's students, and though he had long since graduated, his presence in their lives never seemed to fade. At first, Eric chalked it up to his wife's caring nature. Erin had always been the type to go out of her way for her students, to make sure they didn't fall through the cracks. She worked tirelessly as a counselor at the local high school, pouring her heart into helping troubled kids find their way. But Sean Powell wasn't just another troubled teen. He was different. He lingered in their lives, showing up at their house without much reason. And Eric noticed. He noticed how Sean seemed to pop up more and more, like an unwanted fixture. At first, he tried to ignore it. He told himself he was being paranoid. But then came the texts, the whispers, the looks. The way Sean looked at Erin when they spoke. The way Erin seemed a little too comfortable around him. Eric started to question everything. His mind raced, spiraling in directions it had never gone before. He found himself obsessing over Sean. Every time his car passed their street, every time the doorbell rang and it was Sean standing there with that nervous smile, Eric's heart would pound in his chest. What was going on? Was Erin hiding something? Was it just a harmless friendship? Or was there more to it? The cracks in the perfect life grew bigger. One evening, it all came to a head. Eric had just come home after a long day. He didn't expect to find Sean Powell standing at the door, waiting for Erin. It was late, much later than usual. He stepped inside and saw Sean, standing there like he belonged. Erin was in the kitchen, preparing dinner for the family. Eric's mind went into overdrive. There they were, together, too familiar, too comfortable. The walls around him felt like they were closing in. He couldn't take it anymore. The fear, the jealousy, the dread, it all came rushing at him. He couldn't get rid of the image of Sean and Erin laughing together, exchanging glances like they shared a secret. A secret he wasn't a part of. A secret that was tearing apart his family, piece by piece. He confronted Erin, demanded answers. His voice was sharp, full of a fear he couldn't control. "What's going on with you and him?" Eric demanded. "Why does he keep coming around? What is this?" Erin tried to reassure him, her voice shaking, but Eric couldn't hear her. The anger, the fear, the paranoia were suffocating him. The words she spoke were muffled, drowned out by his own growing sense of betrayal. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became. What if his worst fears were true? What if Erin had been hiding something from him? What if she was really involved with Sean Powell? He turned to Sean, standing awkwardly by the door. His emotions were a hurricane now, too strong to hold back. The words that came out of his mouth were cruel, filled with a venom he didn't know he had inside him. "What are you doing here?" Eric barked. "Why don't you just leave my wife alone?" Sean stood there, frozen, his hands at his sides. He was just a teenager, a kid trying to figure out his own life, but Eric didn't see that. All he saw was a threat. He didn't care about context, about reason. His mind was a whirlwind of jealousy and doubt, and he felt his world slipping away, little by little, as he stood there, staring at the young man who he believed was responsible for all of it. The silence in the room was deafening. Aaron tried to speak, to calm him down, but it was no use. The anger boiled over, and without thinking, Eric grabbed the shotgun that had been resting against the wall. His hand was shaking, but he didn't notice. His mind was already made up. He didn't want to hear any more explanations. He didn't want to feel like his life was slipping through his fingers anymore. In that split second, he pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot shattered the night. The world around Eric froze for a moment, as if the universe itself held its breath. He stood there, staring at the lifeless body of Sean Powell, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of what he had just done hit him like a freight train. It was too late. He couldn't take it back. Sean Powell, a young man with his whole life ahead of him, was gone. And Eric McLean was standing over him, a man consumed by regret, fear, and rage, knowing that he had made a choice that would change everything forever. Erin's frantic 911 call pierced the silence, her voice full of panic. He shot him with a shotgun. "Please come. Hurry," she screamed. The desperation in her voice echoed in Eric's ears, but there was nothing he could do. The moment was over. The irreversible had happened. The community was stunned when they heard the news. A young man, dead at the hands of a husband, wife? What led to such a tragic mistake? How could this happen in their quiet suburban town? Eric was arrested, charged with second-degree murder. But the case wasn't as simple as it seemed. Was this a crime of passion, fueled by jealousy and fear? Was it an act of self-defense gone terribly wrong? Or was it something more? Something deeper? Eric claimed it was a mistake, a tragic mistake made in a moment of blind fear and rage. But could he truly be forgiven for such a decision? The trial that followed divided the community. Some believed Eric was guilty of murder, his actions premeditated, driven by an overwhelming jealousy that clouded his judgment. Others saw a man overwhelmed by fear, unable to control the emotions that consumed him. Eric's remorse was evident. In interviews, he spoke of how deeply sorry he was, how he never meant for any of this to happen. His face was etched with regret, and he admitted that in that moment, when he saw Sean and Erin together, his world felt like it was collapsing. The fear of losing everything, the jealousy, the rage, it had all come together and led him down a path he could never undo. But despite his deep remorse, the damage had been done. Sean Powell was gone. Eric's family had been torn apart by a moment of violence, and nothing would ever be the same. To everyone's surprise, Eric was given probation for the crime. Despite taking a life, despite the tragedy of it all, he was not sentenced to prison. The public was outraged. How could someone who killed another person walk away so lightly? But others believed Eric's actions were the result of overwhelming emotion, that he was not a cold-blooded murderer, but a man who had snapped in the face of a deep personal crisis. But there was more to this story than just the trial. After Sean's death, Erin found herself at the center of a new controversy. She was hired by a private school in Nashville, but it wasn't long before another parent came forward with accusations, new allegations about Erin being involved with a student once again. This was too much for the school, and Erin was fired. It seemed like Erin's troubled past was far from over. In the aftermath of it all, Eric McLean's life was irrevocably changed. The family he had fought so hard to protect, the life he had built, was now shattered. He was left with the haunting consequences of his actions. The fear, the jealousy, the moment of rage, it all led to this. To loss, to guilt, to a life that could never be the same. Eric McLean's story serves as a haunting reminder of the power of jealousy, fear, and suspicion. It's a reminder that sometimes, in the heat of the moment, we make decisions that will change the course of our lives forever. And for Eric McLean, the weight of that decision will follow him for the rest of his days. Story 2. Imagine waking up in the comfort of your own home, in a life you've built with someone you love, only for that peace to be shattered in the most unimaginable way. What if the very person you trusted the most, the one you believed in above all others, was the one to break that peace forever? This is the tragic story of Phil Hartman, a beloved comedian whose life was cut short by the person who should have been his greatest ally, his wife. But the horror didn't stop with his death. What followed was a murder-suicide that would leave an indelible mark on the world of comedy and reveal the hidden demons that no one saw coming. This is the chilling tale of Phil Hartman's tragic end, a story that continues to ripple through the hearts of his family, his fans, and the entire world. It's a devastating look at how love, mental illness, and the pressures of life can intersect in the most tragic of ways. Get comfortable, dim the lights, and prepare yourself for a story that will linger long after the credits roll. Phil Hartman was a name that brought laughter to millions. His ability to seamlessly slip into various characters on Saturday Night Live was unmatched. From the calm, calculated Bill Clinton to the endearing unfrozen caveman lawyer, Hartman was the ultimate chameleon. Delivering wit, charm, and comedy with unparalleled precision. He was the heart of SNL in the late 80s and early 90s, a comedic genius who could bring any character to life. Yet, while Phil Hartman appeared to have it all, behind the scenes, he was a man struggling with the complexities of his personal life. In the early 90s, he met Bryn Omdahl, a stunning model and aspiring actress. She was energetic, beautiful, and their connection was instant. They quickly became inseparable. In 1987, they married, and soon after, they welcomed 2 children, a son and a daughter. For a while, it seemed like they had everything, a perfect family, the ideal marriage. But the truth is often far more complicated than appearances let on. Bryn, despite her outer beauty and charisma, was wrestling with deep struggles that no one outside their immediate circle truly understood. The pressures of fame, the relentless spotlight, and the emotional demands of motherhood began to take a toll on her. Those closest to Bryn later revealed that she had battled severe substance abuse issues, and her mental health was deteriorating. As the years went on, Bryn's mental health struggles worsened. Though friends and family described her as warm and engaging, they also knew she had a darker side, one that became more evident when she was alone with Phil. She wrestled with bouts of depression, feelings of inadequacy, and an unrelenting sense of self-doubt. To the outside world, she seemed to have everything, but privately, she was unraveling. Phil, ever the optimist and dedicated partner, did his best to support her. He loved Bryn deeply, and despite her struggles, he never gave up on their marriage. But over time, the strain on him grew. He found himself torn between the man who adored his wife and the reality of living with someone whose mental health issues were spiraling. He was caught in a delicate balance, trying to remain a stabilizing force, yet feeling helpless as Bryn's struggles consumed her. There were whispers of problems in their marriage. Friends noticed a growing tension, though it was hidden well from the public eye. Bryn's substance abuse became more pronounced, and she started isolating herself from those who could help. She became increasingly erratic, yet to the world, they were still the perfect couple. But behind closed doors, things were far from perfect. By 1997, Bryn had become suspicious of Phil's relationships with other women. Some attributed this to her jealousy of the attention he received, while others speculated that her deep-rooted self-esteem issues fueled her growing paranoia. No matter the cause, this suspicion was the spark that set the stage for the horrific events that would unfold a year later. As Bryn's emotional distress deepened, Phil's career was thriving. He had just landed a major role on News Radio, a hit television show that became a defining moment in his career. Phil played Bill McNeil, a self-absorbed, yet endearing news anchor, showcasing his incredible range once more. But with success came more attention, more pressure, and more public scrutiny. For Bryn, this only exacerbated the tension between them. The more Phil achieved, the more distant their marriage became. Despite his growing professional success, Phil's home life was crumbling. Bryn's mental health deteriorated further, and her substance abuse problems continued to worsen. Despite his best efforts, Phil couldn't fix the situation. His once joyful marriage was now clouded by fear, confusion, and resentment. The evening of May 27, 1998, seemed like any other for the Hartman family. The sun had set over Los Angeles, and the usual hum of the city gave way to the peaceful quiet of the night. Phil Hartman, fresh from another day of success, was home with his wife and their 2 children. The house, normally filled with laughter and warmth, was calm that evening. The children had been tucked into bed, their soft breathing the only sound in the house. It seemed like just another peaceful night in the Hartman household, a family at rest, a family that appeared to have it all. Phil, ever the easygoing, warm presence, had settled into bed, likely reflecting on the day's events with satisfaction. Bryn, once full of promise, lay beside him. But beneath the calm, there was a storm brewing, a storm that would soon shatter everything. The cracks that had formed in their relationship were widening, and that night, they would break open in the most devastating way. As the clock ticked past midnight, the house remained silent, but within the walls, things were beginning to change. Bryn's inner turmoil, which had been simmering for years, reached its boiling point. She had struggled for so long, and now, in the early morning hours, she reached a breaking point. The weight of her paranoia, depression, and addiction took its toll, and in that fragile state, she made a decision that would alter everything forever. In the early hours of May 28, 1998, Bryn reached for the .38 caliber revolver that had been kept in the family safe for protection. She moved quietly through the house, a storm of emotion clouding her mind. The man she had once loved, the man she had built a life with, was sleeping just a few feet away. The gun was heavy in her hand, and in that moment, Bryn's thoughts seemed to sharpen with a clarity that was as terrifying as it was final. Phil, the man who had made millions laugh, was blissfully unaware of the danger just inches away. He lay asleep in the bed they had shared for years, trusting the woman next to him, the woman who had been his partner, his friend, his wife. Bryn aimed the gun at Phil, and with a single, impulsive action, she pulled the trigger. The deafening sound of the gunshot shattered the stillness of the room. It was a sound that marked the end of a life. Phil Hartman, beloved comedian, husband, father, and friend, was gone. In that moment, the man who had brought so much joy to the world, who had entertained millions, was taken from the world in an instant. The shock of his sudden, violent death left his family, friends, and the entire world in disbelief. The life of a man who had been a beacon of warmth and humor was extinguished by the very person he had trusted most. But the horror didn't end there. Bryn, in the aftermath of her actions, was left to grapple with the enormity of what she had just done. Overcome with despair, she called a friend, revealing the unthinkable act she had committed. And then, in the darkest moment of all, Bryn turned the gun on herself, ending her own life in the early hours of the same morning. Phil Hartman's death was not just the loss of a talented comedian, but the tragic loss of a family. His 2 young children, left without parents, had their world torn apart in a matter of hours. The news of Phil's death sent shockwaves through Hollywood, his colleagues, friends, and fans all left stunned by the brutality and senselessness of it all. How could this happen? How could someone who had brought so much joy to the world, someone who had been adored by millions, be taken in such a violent, senseless way? And how could the woman who had once been his partner, the one person he trusted most, become the one to end his life? Phil Hartman's death would be remembered as one of Hollywood's most tragic losses, a senseless, heartbreaking tragedy that raised questions that would haunt everyone for years to come. What led to this? Where did the darkness begin? And how did a life so full of promise end in such destruction? The aftermath of the tragedy left 2 young children without parents. Family members stepped in to care for them, providing the love and stability that was cruelly taken from them. But the damage was done. The Hartman children would forever be marked by the unthinkable tragedy they had witnessed. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Bryn had been struggling with severe mental health issues. Substance abuse, depression, and instability were factors that contributed to this horrible event, but it still left so many unanswered questions. How had things gotten to this point? How had a woman, who had once been so full of promise, spiraled into such despair? Phil Hartman's legacy lives on, not just in the laughter he gave to millions, but in the roles that defined an entire generation. His work on Saturday Night Live and The Simpsons solidified his place in the pantheon of comedy. Yet, his untimely death serves as a tragic reminder of the fragility of the human mind and the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness. His story reminds us of something we too often overlook: sometimes, even the most seemingly perfect lives hide the darkest struggles. It teaches us the importance of paying attention to the signs, of offering support to those in need, and of understanding that, sometimes, the greatest battles are fought in silence. This tragedy reminds us to look deeper, to listen carefully, and to recognize that sometimes, the most devastating consequences come from the pain we fail to see. Story 3. Imagine falling for someone you meet online, a stranger, yet the connection feels undeniable. But as the days pass, something doesn't seem quite right. A nagging feeling starts to grow. The messages get stranger. The calls get more frequent. What you thought was a harmless fling quickly turns into something far darker, an obsession. And soon, the person you thought you could trust becomes a nightmare. This is the chilling true crime story of Carrie Farver, whose life was turned upside down by a love that turned into something far more sinister. In Lover, Stalker, Killer, we'll unravel the twisted tale of obsession, manipulation, and murder, one that will keep you wide awake long after the lights go out. Get comfortable, dim the lights, and let the story sink in as we explore the true horror behind Carrie's disappearance. A simple online dating experience, a simple love story, gone terribly wrong. Get ready for a story that will linger in your mind as you drift off to sleep, haunting you long after you've closed your eyes. Carrie Farver was a 37-year-old woman who had been living an ordinary life in Omaha, Nebraska. She had a job, a family who loved her, and the kind of life many would envy, at least from the outside. Carrie wasn't one to shy away from the idea of love. Like many others, she turned to the internet to try and find a meaningful connection. What she didn't realize was that the search for love would soon lead her into a nightmare, one that would unfold in the shadows, in ways she could never have imagined. In the fall of 2012, Carrie found herself talking to a man named Dave Kropa through an online dating website. Their initial conversations were like any other, light, full of casual talk and the excitement of getting to know someone new. Soon enough, they began dating, and Carrie felt she had met someone who seemed kind, a man she could trust. The early signs of a possible romance felt good, even promising. But soon, what Carrie didn't know was that someone else had already entered her life in ways she couldn't have anticipated. Someone who would soon become obsessed with her in the most disturbing way. That someone was Shauna, a woman with whom Carrie had never spoken directly, but whose presence would loom over her life in ways that would soon turn deadly. You see, what started as an innocent romance between Carrie and Dave quickly spiraled when Shauna, who was also involved with Dave, began to fixate on Carrie. What at first appeared to be a harmless attraction grew into something far more sinister. Shauna's obsession with Carrie took over her mind, and it wasn't long before she started sending harassing messages, creating fake online profiles to stalk and torment her. What was once an online connection for Carrie became a living nightmare. Shauna was consumed with jealousy. She couldn't stand the idea of Carrie being with someone she had once been involved with. The jealousy began to fester. And so, from the shadows, Shauna began her campaign of manipulation, sending threatening messages and increasingly erratic communications. What Carrie thought were innocent exchanges between two women turned into something dark, twisted, and dangerous. And it didn't stop there. Shauna's obsession intensified. The boundaries of a normal relationship were shattered as Shauna started weaving a web of lies. She was no longer just an interested party, she became an invasive force in Carrie's life. From this moment on, Carrie was unknowingly being stalked, watched, controlled. What was supposed to be a time of excitement and new beginnings instead became a period of fear and isolation for Carrie, as she began to realize that something was terribly wrong. Shauna had begun to push Carrie out of her comfort zone, sending messages pretending to be Dave, manipulating Carrie into thinking that everything was spiraling out of control. She used the guise of love to invade Carrie's life further, driving wedges between her and Dave, sowing seeds of doubt in Carrie's mind. Slowly, the once cheerful, independent woman found herself cornered in a game she didn't even know she was playing. Carrie eventually stopped returning messages from Dave. The relationship with him faltered as Shauna's interference grew bolder, more destructive. But the true nightmare had yet to unfold. Carrie, already emotionally drained and confused, had no idea that the obsessive behavior from Shauna would soon escalate to something irreversible. On November 13, 2012, Carrie Farver, once a woman full of life, would be lost to her family and friends. She vanished. She was gone, without a trace. For her mother, her family, the terrifying reality of her disappearance hit them like a storm. No one knew where Carrie had gone, and what at first seemed like a simple missing person case turned into a much darker mystery. The police investigation began, and as it did, something unsettling emerged. The more they dug, the more they realized that this was no ordinary missing person case. As investigators looked into Carrie's life, they found unsettling text messages, emails, and even traces of fake online profiles. It all pointed to a deep obsession. An obsession that wasn't just about love, but about control. The investigation grew more complicated, and the truth began to surface, slowly revealing how Shauna had orchestrated Carrie's disappearance, using manipulation and lies to make Carrie's life a living hell. Shauna was no longer just a stalker, she had become the true instigator of this tragic event. The obsessive love she had for Dave had led her to commit an unspeakable crime. Shauna's obsession had reached its deadly climax. The revelation was shocking. Shauna was not just stalking Carrie, she had taken it a step further. After weeks of tormenting her, she had killed Carrie. In an unthinkable act of violence, driven by jealousy and obsession, Shauna had brutally murdered Carrie Farver. But the horror didn't stop there. She went on to stage the scene to make it appear as though Carrie had simply vanished. She manipulated the events in such a way that no one suspected the truth until it was too late. Shauna's chilling plan had been executed in the most callous of ways. What she had done to Carrie was unimaginable. What started as a love triangle of sorts had spiraled out of control into a case of manipulation, obsession, and ultimately, murder. The devastation left in the wake of Carrie Farver's death was immeasurable. The impact on her family was profound, and the horror of the events that had unfolded remained seared in the minds of everyone who learned the truth. How could something that started as a search for love end in such a tragic, senseless loss? And as we reflect on this story, the haunting reality of this case lingers. It's a grim reminder of the dark side of online relationships, of the obsession that can take root in even the most innocent of circumstances, and of the devastating consequences that can arise when mental illness and obsession are left unchecked. Carrie Farver's story is one that should make us all pause and consider the dangers lurking beneath the surface of online connections, and how easy it is for someone to become a victim of someone else's unhealthy fixation. As we lay down tonight, let this story serve as a reminder: be mindful of the relationships you form, of the lines between affection and obsession, and of how a simple connection, once innocent, can turn into a dangerous game with deadly consequences. What happened to Carrie Farver is a tragedy we should never forget. It's a story of love, loss, and the dark side of human nature. Let it stay with you. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. And be sure to subscribe for more calming true crime stories to accompany your peaceful nights. We've got many more stories waiting for you.